think I'll have a shake.
Playing Wanted Dead is like watching a spectacular car crash. It's that one scene in The Wire where a drunk Detective McNulty crashes his car, then tries the same corner again, convinced he can do it right this time, before he smashes it up even worse. I've always wanted to do Demolition Derby, so take that into account when I say I voluntarily got into this metaphorical car. Amidst juvenile antics, loud sensibilities and questionable taste, is a bizarre action game packing dozens of ideas into a ride I kinda love. Wanted Dead takes place in a near future Hong Kong where you play as Hannah Stone, a woman who loves removing sleeves almost as much as I do, and a prisoner given a shot of freedom by becoming an indentured member of a police hit squad serving the mega corporations that run the world. She and her ragtag team carry out whatever dirty work is asked of them, while uncovering a conspiracy unfolding around them. There's going to be a lot of comparisons tossed around for Wanted Dead. Some obvious, like Gears of War, Binary Domain, or Vanquish, maybe even Wet. Any 360 third-person shooter, basically. Wanted Dead channels their sensibilities for chest-high walls and squads of bros, albeit with a woman in the lead, but sips it up with bloody, ludicrous, hack-and-slashing action you might expect of a Ninja Gaiden. In motion, with your pistol acting as a counterattack while your sword dishes out the real damage, it almost resembles the heightened absurdity of the later John Wick films, mixing martial arts with modern firearms. It all comes to a head in the boss fights that are sometimes a giant spider tank, but often a single opponent, locking you into a lightning-quick duel. The boss fights are painful spikes in difficulty, but they can help push you towards uncovering the depths of the game's fights. There's plenty of substance underneath the style, even if, frankly, I never tired of the most basic action of sliding along the floor and slicing some henchmen in half. That alone would make Wanted Dead an appealing novelty, but then there are parts of it that resemble games like Yakuza and Deadly Premonition. Between missions of high-octane action and tough-as-nails boss fights, you get downtime at your headquarters where you can have a go on a claw machine or do a ramen-eating minigame. The inclusion of these elements feels less like an attempt to become some kind of all-encompassing life sim, and more an exercise in stretching the limits of our dissonance. Are you playing as an underdog convict turned desperate mercenary? Or an ignorant murderous agent of the state?
Do you feel pain?
Do you?
Or are you and your squad a bunch of goofy dickheads who'd rather just drop their jobs and enjoy some hobbies? Tonally, the game is a spectacularly odd beast that will put in everything from a reframing of Call of Duty's infamous C-130 level, where instead of a nebulous hostile enemy, your police crew are putting down protesting androids. And then you get scenes that had me laughing out loud, like this one where Hannah has to contend with the cafeteria's garbage quality food. And all of that is without mentioning how the game uses anime-style animation to depict flashbacks in Hannah's past. A stylistic touch that is genuinely used evocatively, if not always in service of great payoff. Deadly Premonition is maybe the most apt comparison because similarly, the thing is fascinating, wears its influences on its sleeves, and is a bit of a mess. It absolutely nails the aesthetic of mid-tier and low-budget 360 titles, despite being a clearly state-of-the-art game in many respects. The early HD era is hardly thought of fondly in terms of visuals, with muddy browns, limited detail under higher resolutions, all leaving many action games of that time kind of unseemly. Yet in channeling a cheap look amidst highly polished animation and character models with sublime controls, Wanted Dead winds up feeling like a commentary on those games. On the face of it, it's completely in step with the immaturity and borderline fascist politics that permeated a lot of third-person shooters of that time, but there is an undercurrent of cynicism for its characters and what they represent. While you carry out the actions of these cops with encouraged, gleeful disregard for anything but the joy of cartoonish, over-the-top violence, it's all consistently framed in light of these people being gung-ho puppets who are clearly the bad guys in most situations. There's a bit of a RoboCop vibe to the whole thing, though perhaps it's telling that its filmic cornerstones are all Western. There's little in the way of ode to Hong Kong cinema like To Be Number One and Chasing the Dragon. If it has any Hong Kong films in mind, it's exclusively the final shootout of John Woo's Hard Boiled. My perception of how self-aware the game is gets muddied by how lacking in Asian characters it is. I counted 2, and one of those was a nameless corpse. The lead characters hang out in an American diner, a tacky refuge for these outsiders, but most of the time they stand amidst Chinese iconography, while even civilians are depicted as distinctly non-East Asian. Why would they set a game in Hong Kong but feature next to no Asian characters? Even the server at their local ramen bar is a goddamn robot. Is the subtext of the game all about outside forces coming in to strip this place of its identity? Is it an accident that the very first image of the game is Margaret Thatcher, who reluctantly handed Hong Kong over to China after over a century of brutal British rule, cementing Britain's bloody colonial history, the ramifications of which are still shaking Hong Kong today? There's a scene where Stone literally breaks open a display case and snatches a new samurai sword at a Japanese corporation's offices that feels so on the nose about cultural appropriation that if it isn't self-aware, it is preposterously thoughtless. No matter the intent, it falls down in being unable to bring a Chinese voice back into that context. Even the androids, who represent working class and victims of police brutality, are uniformly shown as white. It's misguided at best. And then the plot, like all the fun mix of minigames and action, is basically dispensed with in the game's final quarter as it devolves into back-to-back stabathons. Some of these final stretches are absolutely grueling in how far they spread out their checkpoints, meaning failure can result in the loss of 10 or so minutes of progress. I can't help but think it's a cynical attempt to draw out the campaign because despite a cool final boss fight, the game just sort of stops. There's little in the way of revelations or twists, despite numerous allusions to backstories we only get a glimpse of. To say it ends on a cliffhanger would be to give it too much credit. There's no final hook to make us wonder what might come in a sequel, even if I'd still want to check one out. And so all that potential, all that baffling subtext ends up without a payoff. I stuck with it for its oddball sensibilities and exhilarating combat. If you can stomach its questionable taste, a brutal difficulty curve, and a flat ending, then you might enjoy this joyride. Just don't expect the car to arrive in one piece.